Good evening, everybody. Welcome. So excited to have you all here. Let's give it another 30 seconds or so while people filter on in, and then we will get started. All right, that felt like 30 seconds. It's not an exact science. Want to welcome everyone here to taking AI prompts to the next level in college admissions. As promised in the registration page, we're going to hopefully teach you some new things tonight, open your eyes, build your capacity for using AI models to do whatever the college admissions related work is that you have to do. But first, a quick introduction for your speakers. My name is Ben Neely. I am the Chief Academic Innovation Officer at Revolution Prep. We're a US-based online tutoring company, been around for about 22 years, and my role is to learn and then connect with educators both at the high school and the college level. And I'm something of an AI enthusiast, and I'm very excited to be joined by...
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Jeff Neal, and this is an unfortunate AI rendering that Ben created of me. I am Director of College Counseling. I graded the American School in Sao Paulo. This is my 24th year working in college admissions, college counseling. I've worked at 6 different schools on 4 continents. This is my 4th year at Graded. And a couple of years ago, I really got sunk my teeth into artificial intelligence when it first started to blossom. And I subsequently created a newsletter called Tech-Neill-ogy, and it comes out on a weekly basis to highlight the intersection of technology and college counseling. And we'll certainly share some links and things like that later on.
And
But
we'll
that
talk a bit
said,
about image generation, by the way, and some of the foibles of AI, including the illustration of Jeff as we go forward. Thank you for your gracious acceptance, Jeff.
so for today, Ben's going to kick us off by understanding some of the right tools. Understand that this is more of an advanced session, thinking about the ways in which you can elevate your work and all that you do with different types of AI models. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of approaches to improving your prompts and how you might go about uh, elevating the work that you do on a regular basis by thinking about the ways in which you interact with those chatbots. And then we're going to do some live examples to try to illustrate the ways in which you might go about improving the work that you do. So with that, without further ado, I think I'll hand off to Ben and he will get us going. But one quick comment first. Again, this is being brought to you by the AI in college admissions special interest group from NACAC. And if you have questions, we do anticipate having somewhere around 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. But if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function throughout. So with that, Ben, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jeff. So in terms of leveling up how you would use AI models around prompting, I think that one of the things that I have noticed as I have gone through my own journey is how I have moved from being a single tool user, and I think we can all guess which one that is when it comes to AI. ChatGPT was probably my first 6 to 10 months of using AI models. And where I find myself now as a more advanced practitioner is regularly using a number of different AI tools to accomplish whatever goal it is that I am pursuing. So want to share a little bit of background for all of you that can hopefully help you start doing that as well. Before I do that, I do want to talk about some terminology. I think as you start to dive into different tools and learn more about AI, it can feel a little bit confusing, maybe a lot confusing. And there are a few terms that I'm going to be using and Jeff might be using that I want to make sure we go through. This is by no means comprehensive. If you hear folks talk about a frontier model, what they're referring to are the latest state-of-the-art AI models and from those who are actually making them. We'll talk later about different tools that use those big tech companies' models, but there's a very limited number of actual cutting edge frontier AI models. That's what frontier means. If you see anyone talk about one shot or few shot or five shot, when it comes to prompting, they're referring to how many specific examples is the AI model being given of a successful exemplar. So if you were doing something related to, hey, here's how I want an abstract to be written. If you gave it a single example, that would be a one shot. If you gave it 5 different abstracts you liked, that would be a 5 shot. Tokens, not really a big deal for any of us end users, but just if you hear that, that is the behind the scenes input output currency of a model. So when you're putting information in, like a prompt or data, that is metered in tokens, kind of like a taxi meter, and then the outputs that it gives you are also metered in tokens. It can in some cases be related to how much you pay for these models, especially as an advanced user who might be building applications, which probably very few of us are. AI wrapper or AI platform, this is when we're talking about a tool that is not one of those frontier models, but uses one or more of them. Chain of thought is an attempt to think like humans do. So rather than just regurgitating words, breaking a problem down into steps and trying to sort of attack it. We'll talk about O1, which is a model that does that. If you see context window, this refers to how much input are you able to give an AI model. So, for example, if you gave it a paragraph, that would be a very small amount of data and require a small context window. If you tried to feed an AI model a novel, that would be a very large context window needed. And so, depending on the tool, some have bigger or smaller context windows. And then finally, in this last one, if you just want to put this in your memory banks, I wager that a year from now, we will be talking a lot more about agents or what is called agentic behavior. So if you think about an AI tool acting as an agent, it is doing more than just spitting out some text. It is actually able to use other tools itself, like a web browser, a calculator, email, text messaging, your calendar, in order to accomplish tasks. So imagine if you were to have an assistant, a human assistant, and you told them to do a bunch of things, and they had, the keys to your car, and they could go park your car and so forth. That's a decent metaphor for what an agent AI system would be able to do, more than just give you text in a chat window. Now, when we talk about frontier models, I mentioned earlier that ChatGPT is where most folks start. I want to do a very quick roundup. Some caveats here. These tools are always changing. And as a matter of fact, Gemini in the middle here has probably seen the most significant change in the last 4 days after many months of no changes. So everything on this slide will only be accurate for, I don't know, the next week or so, and then it will probably all change again. But at the moment, some strengths and weaknesses. I think of ChatGPT as the all-arounder. It is one of the easiest to use. It can do the most different types of things: video, still images, text, voice, translation, uploading files, searching the internet. It's a very multi-capable model. It also, at least for the moment, has the best reasoning models. We talk about chain of thought, which is that term I use to describe breaking down a problem into multiple steps. O1 is ChatGPT's model that does that really well. For writing, not so important, but for anything that involves reasoning, where you're breaking something challenging into steps, and certainly if you have any math or science problems to tackle, it's really, really good at that and for planning. Some of the challenges with GPT's models, and these may not matter to you, its tone and how it talks to you, or at least regurgitates words at you, is not very collaborative. It tends to kind of just tell you things like, here's what you're going to do. Whereas some other models actually are a little friendlier and more likely to phrase things as, hey, let's do this together, which again, might not be a factor that matters to you at all. And at the moment, at least, ChatGPT's models do have the highest rate when researchers study how often it might cite inaccurate facts confidently. That being said, this is way better than it was a year ago. And I don't want you to think that this is a high rate overall of hallucinations. It's just one of the small weaknesses of GPT is it's not quite as good at Gemini and Claude at always sticking to factual accuracy. Gemini is Google's flagship AI product. Google has really lagged, I would say, overall in the AI development race, which is surprising considering their size, their resources, their past innovations. But in this last week or two, they have rolled out a couple new versions of their 2.0 product. And from my limited early use, I am very impressed, whereas I was not very impressed with 1.5, which was their previous model. Some strength for Google, it is plugged into their ecosystem. You've already started to see this if you use Gmail or Google. You start to see the summaries. Sometimes they're helpful. Sometimes they're very obnoxious. Also, how I feel about Apple Intelligence on the iPhone. This model does have the biggest context window, not usually relevant for most of us, but if you found yourself in a position where you had a ton of data that you needed to feed in, it can handle it. They do now have some agentic behavior. So Google's model can now start to accomplish things beyond just searching. For example, depending on permissions, it might be able to send an email on your behalf and so forth. It's just starting to roll out. The weaknesses, the ecosystem features have been buggy. The famous example I love to use is the pizza recipe where it called for Elmer's non-toxic glue in with the mozzarella when it was suggesting how to make a good pizza recipe. And for now, some of these features are not as easy to use. They haven't been integrated as much into the chat format like ChatGPT does. Finally, you have Claude, which is the frontier model from a company called Anthropic. There are a lot of, I would say, a small but passionate fan base for Claude. And I think one of the big reasons it develops a fan base, it's a very strong model for writing. It also just has probably the most human-like tone and warmth to it. And some people might find that a little creepy, a little uncanny valley, but it is the one that you are most likely to, I would say, just enjoy conversing with. And that might matter to you or it might not. They now have some agent-like behavior where you can teach Claude to interact with your browser, right? You can teach it to say, hey, try to help me book a plane ticket. Again, be careful. Your mileage may vary if it has a live credit card. And it also has a tool called Artifacts, which allows it to run sort of little mini demos of code. You could say, hey, I want to build a fun little widget which illustrates this point in a little game, and it will build it. Downsides of Claude, it is the one that is most likely to refuse to answer your question for ethical or moral or legal grounds. That is sort of the philosophy of the folks who build Claude, is that they are probably the most cautious about AI development. In some cases, I have found this to be a reasonable response. There are other times where you might say, hey, I have a question about kind of medicine or this or that. It'll say, hey, I am not a doctor. I'm not even going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, even though your question was pretty limited and mild in terms of ethical impact. Claude is also the most likely to give you an error message saying you've run out of usage, which is why I stopped subscribing to Claude. I got really frustrated with being told that I couldn't use it anymore, even though I felt like I had just barely started using it for the day. And it also does not have any ability to go out and access and search current web pages. Again, that is part of Claude's philosophy. So I know that sounds like a lot of weaknesses, but there, like I said, there's a small but very passionate fan base for the latest Claude model. Now, outside of the frontier core models, there are a bunch of other tools that go out and use those frontier models in a wrapper or a container or a platform to specific effect. This is, again, not all of them. These are probably the 7 from my research and my usage that I think are the most powerful and commonly used for different things. For any kind of AI work that is really search intensive, I need to do some research on, I used Perplexity for Black Friday deals this year, where it would go out and have it try to find, I really wanted to buy this present for my kid or something. Go find me, search the web, find me at least 10 different stores, compare prices and so forth. But behind the scenes, Perplexity did not write their own AI models. They're just using ChatGPT and Claude and whatever else to power that. Notebook LM, look for a demo on this later. This is, you could consider it a subproduct of Gemini, so it is also from Google, but it's specifically good at answering questions and producing new content just based on what you give it and not using its training set and not using anything else. It's pretty powerful for that. DeepL I have not used, but apparently it is one of the highest rated and most used translation tools that is AI powered. Canva is what this presentation was created in. If you have not used Canva, I can only tell you it has my highest recommendations as someone who is unskilled in graphic design. It almost makes me seem like I know what I'm doing sometimes, and it does have a number of built-in AI features for image generation and layouts and things like that. Grammarly has advanced. You could think of them as sort of an early AI tool a couple years ago, where it was really just focused on what are the rules of grammar. Now they are using GPT-4 Omni behind the scenes to do things like suggest revisions. And in some cases, this can be not so transparent and a little bit confusing when students are accused of, hey, you used AI to write. And they're like, I used Grammarly, without realizing that it has those features. I think they actually have a pretty good implementation of them. But I would say if I was already subscribed to GPT, using the Canvas feature for editing in ChatGPT, I don't know that I would really need to go and use Grammarly personally. And then finally, these last two are very specific uses. But if you ever need to make a video avatar, or you need to make a quick video, either using a stock, AI model or avatar, or make your own avatar, kind of mind blowing what HeyGen can do with that. And similarly, what 11 Labs can do with creating speech or creating a model of your voice and then typing in text and having it do a voiceover for a video you might want to send. Like, kind of both super impressive, these last two tools, and also a bit scary and daunting when it comes to the sanctity of each of our human images and voices. But they are tools that can actually be used for good as well. And last thing, and then I'm going to hand it off to Jeff to talk about prompting. The other tool that gets used a lot, whether you're making presentations or flyers or emails, is image generation. And yes, every single image in this presentation, I'm sure you're not surprised to hear, was generated by some image generation tool or another. So I spend a lot of time constantly trying these out. These are probably the 4 most used in the world right now. So you don't need to necessarily know the names of these, but I am including them so you know. So DALL-E 3 is actually the name of the image generation algorithm that OpenAI uses. So that's what ChatGPT uses if you ask it to generate something. Again, it's just kind of like GPT itself. It's well-rounded. It usually does an okay job. It's not my current favorite. I tend to find that it loves to try to put text in, and it does really poorly with text. So Herte your essay, whatever HERTE is what it's spelling for us. Right now, and this is, again, was not true 3 days ago, Google's image tool, which is used by Gemini 1.5 or 2.0, it's called Imagen 3. It just came out, I think, 2 weeks ago, actually. I think it is the best current image tool, and I used it for almost all the images in this deck. Other than that unfortunate one of Jeff that my phone spit out this morning. Aurora, Grok is an AI model that not many folks use. I would say there's a lot of baggage with that AI tool, but their new image model is generally quite good. In this case, however, I'm not sure what kind of laptop the student is using that is double backed and has screen on the backside of its laptop. But the selection of options it gave me for the student were all very photorealistic and good. And then Canva's built-in tool, I think, is much better for abstract design than it is photorealism. This student has something going on with the upper facial structure, her fingers. It's just the closer you look, the more it can be unsettling with some of these tools. So again, at this moment, and by the way, Imagen 3 is free. If you just search Imagen 3, or you go, I think it's called their Image FX Studio, part of Google's attempt to catch up right now to OpenAI is they're making a lot of their best tools free right now. So I do strongly recommend, if you need to make images, and not just photorealistic ones, abstract, anime style, watercolor, what you name it, Imagen 3 is really good right now. There's another tool I didn't include. It's called Midjourney. It is probably one of the most powerful. It is also the least user-friendly. It only works through Discord, and it's for super image generation focused people only. I think right now Imagen 3 is the best combination of free and quality and ease of use. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff. And now that we have a sense of all the different possible tools that can help you, he's going to dial in a little bit on how you might improve your prompts.
Okay, so again, excuse me, keeping in mind that this is meant to be a more advanced session, I hope some of you were able to join for the beginner session. I think that was last week. What I'd really like to just focus on is kind of a thought experiment, really, about using artificial intelligence for a particular use case. And in the case that I'm going to use here, we're going to talk a little bit about building a college list and the ways in which you might go about doing that. And I'll show you a number of different iterations, a number of different illustrations about how you can do that. But first, Ben, if you can go to the next slide. Really, I was explaining to Ben beforehand when we are getting ready for the presentation. I have this printed out and it is immediately above my computer at work. Always using AI for different reasons in the workplace. And there's three different ones that I've found to be particularly helpful in guiding the crafting of your prompts using a different, my preferred tool, just to come back to it from what Ben was talking about, is ChatGPT. Part of that was it was the first one that was available. And then for a long time, it was the only one that was available here in Brazil, where I am. But particularly, let me just dive in a little bit. Risen, and these are each are acronyms. Risen stands for role, instruction, steps, end goal, and narrowing constraints. It works really well for structured tasks that you need to give it real guidance for. Trying to think about the different ways in which you might implement artificial intelligence in your work. Risen is one, for example, when we use it to aggregate information for a letter of recommendation. Risen was kind of what led me towards the final product of our prompt that we use in my office. Create, character, request, examples, additions or adjustments, type of output and extras. And this one's really good for fostering creativity and collaboration. Really trying to think about the ways in which you're trying to enable ChatGPT or your chatbot of choice to facilitate some sort of creative output, something that you're not necessarily confined by specific restraints, the way that the RISEN acronym might be potentially helpful. And finally, CoStar, standing for context, objective, style, tone, audience, and response. Really looking for the ways in which you can engage with an audience, whether that's an email, a presentation, looking for assistance in making a handout or something like that. Thinking about the ways in which CoStar and following those particular instructions, those particular steps really can facilitate an improvement of your prompting. And the quick anecdote that I would share is just that idea that, when I first started toying around with artificial intelligence on ChatGPT 3 in November of 2022, early December of 2022, there was no handbook. There was no, we didn't know what we were doing. All of us were kind of just left to the wild to figure it out on our own. And so people have put some really good thought processes in place around these, some good frameworks, some good structured. And these are three that I find myself using on a routine basis. So I want to kind of kick things off by sharing that. If you go to the next slide, Ben. So one of the other things that has kind of evolved, and I can't remember exactly, maybe Ben can remember when custom instructions came about. I'm thinking it was about a year ago, but
Yeah, I think
it
that's
was
right.
definitely in the last year, where custom instructions enable users to give, and I'm using ChatGPT here, but from my understanding, this does exist in some capacity in pretty much each of the different platforms. But it allows you to give it specific instructions about who you are and what you're looking for in your output. So it asks two fundamental questions in ChatGPT, and you can see it gives 1,500 characters. First, information about the user. Who are you? What are you trying to get at? What do you do for a living? Which enables it to give more sort of detailed, specific instructions and or responses to the prompts that you provide. And then a preferred style response. Response style. So you can tell it stylistically what it is that you're looking for it to respond with, tone, formality, and those sorts of things. So again, the thought experiment that I wanted to kind of lead you along is this idea of building a college list. So here, let's just take, for example, this very simple prompt of provide me with a list of universities in the US for a student who's interested in studying political science at a small college in New England and who has a 3.1 GPA and a 1200 SAT. So then if you go to the next slide and hit play. So here, again, this is a recording, there is no sound, so I'm going to narrate over it. Really simply, it's just copying and pasting that exact prompt that I shared. And it says, here's a list of small colleges. Without giving that in the prompt, it's providing likely, possible, and reach suggestions. Husson, New England College, Southern Vermont, Castleton, and then some possibles, St. Michael's, Endicott, Maine Farmington, Roger Williams, and then in the reach category, Clark, Trinity College, Connecticut College. And you'll see that it provided these, and that was sort of live recording in the sense that that's the real time that it was actually showing. What I would say is it does a good job. It does a fairly decent job. And a couple of things that I just want to sort of throw in as sort of disclaimers that I personally have not yet figured out how to do is to account for school-specific context, where maybe some of those institutions, for whatever reason, historically have had different acceptance rates, different reasons for prioritizing our applicants or not prioritizing applicants from our school. So that's one component. And the second component is while we in my office do implement artificial intelligence on a regular basis in conjunction with our students, I would never encourage anybody to use it as the sort of final product in the sense of, here, go create your list. What we've done is, in some context, use that sort of prompt to help a student create an initial college list, or if they're stuck, to try to build a list a little bit more broadly, experiment to see if there are any institutions that they're overlooking. So that said, now implementing the custom instructions. So here, what I've done here is just gone and entered, I'm a high school college counselor at an international high school in Brazil with a large population of students who want to study overseas. Provide specific guidance to students and their families is an essential component of my work. In particular, data is of the utmost importance. And then in the second part, that how would you like ChatGPT to respond? I said the responses should be concise but supported by data. The tone should be formal and professional. And so what I did is I went and entered these custom instructions. And then Ben, if you can show the next slide, what I did is just went and did the exact same prompt, identical, list of universities, small college in New England for political science. And it came up with some of the same institutions, but likely with a 75% chance. But what you'll see is it provides the average GPA and SAT scores, which responds a little bit more directly to that request in the custom instructions about using data. Support your arguments with data. And it comes up, some different things maybe have moved around a little bit. So now we have UNE, Gordon, Colby Sawyer in Eastern Connecticut in that possible category. Whereas in the reach, St. Michael's, Wheaton College. And also realize it's giving a little bit of additional what you could call data in the anecdotal sense about what the strengths of the political science program are. Um, See, it lags a little bit depending upon your connectivity. And Clark University. So some of the things stayed the same. Some of it sort of triggered into other ideas. It also has the foresight to say many of these schools are test optional, so other parts of the application might be important. And then what kind of involvement in other activities might be particularly helpful for a student. So you can see the ways in which adding that particular context within the custom instructions can evolve the ways in which it provides information to you. So Ben, if you go to the next. So this is sort of evolving that sort of context and thinking more about this idea of a what we might call a mega prompt or a multi-stepped prompt. And one thing that a lot of people I think often overlook is the fact that you can engage with chatbots in an iterative process. So you can ask it to ask, as it says here in the last line, ask me one question at a time. So we got a video that we'll show on the next slide. And this is going to be a little bit lengthier, but this is the exact prompt that I shared on the previous slide. It's going to ask me about different questions. It does here pretty clearly articulate what the different categories likely possible and reach are. And so here, the first question is, where are you looking? And I say the USA. And then see what it's doing is it's kind of going through an iterative process of asking questions. Do you have any preference, a regional preference within the US? I had no preference. I actually stood with a student of mine and had them answer the questions with me as I was doing this recording. So this is where things get a little bit more dicey, is when you start to try to implement financial need. And I think this might be within our industry, the $1 million question about how to best incorporate artificial intelligence into a search that is guided by financial need. But here we say they can only afford $20,000 per year. The rest will need to be need-based. And so this particular field, I said political science, campus environment. No preference. So realize the interactive conversational nature of the ways in which ChatGPT here is going through and asking. So gives us a lot. How about diversity? Diversity, important to me. Some typos, it reads right through them. Have you taken any SATs? So 3.6 unweighted and a 1400 SAT. So slightly different from the previous illustrations. So it's thinking, you can see it's updating its memory. It's putting the answers that I've given it into its temporary memory. So now any extracurriculars, says I'm active in Model UN. So now it's going to try to identify different schools that might be a good fit for this particular student. It thinks. And I asked it for 3 likely, 4 possible, 3 reach, and 3 far reach. And I think what you'll find is very much similar to the previous prompts, is it comes up with a pretty good list with a couple of notable exceptions, a couple of notable omissions. Just looking while it's doing its thinking. Have you tried using ChatGPT to help analyze common data sets across several schools? Anonymous attendee, I will get back to you in the very next section as I show you a little bit of one particular use case to address that. Um, and then, okay, so here, Ben, you want to pause that real quick? All right, so here it comes up and you can't see the far right, but it goes from likely to possible to reach. So it starts with American Temple and the University of Iowa, moves from Richmond, BU, University of Miami, Fordham, then North Carolina, Georgetown, USC, and then for the far reaches, Columbia, Harvard, and Stanford. And it does a decent job in terms of a sort of a base sort of place to start. I think it does a decent job. Now, one of the things that it has significantly overlooked is that financial component. Very few of these places would be, and yes, this is using ChatGPT. The output, I did not dictate what kind of output, so it decided to create a spreadsheet. But very few of these places would be places that I would actually recommend for a student in that particular financial situation. So that's one of those challenges. Again, maybe the $1 million question within our industry, if anybody can figure out exactly how to make that function in a more user-friendly way, be interesting. So next slide, if you can. So evolving this and a little bit to what came up in the Q&A, I want to show just a particular use case. Can you go to the next slide? So many of you, I hope, if you haven't, Jenny Kent and Jeff Levy, which is a Big J Consulting, each year put together this comprehensive, actually about 5 or 6 different data sets. This one is financial aid for undergraduate international non-citizens. So for international students who are looking for financial aid. And you can see just looking across, and I'll skip Adelphi and look at Agnes Scott, provides the name of the institution, the state, the region, their aid policy. So in Agnes Scott's situation, they provide need and merit aid to international applicants. The total cost of attendance is $64,812. 896 undergrads, 19 international students, so 2% non-citizens within all of their undergraduate population. And then it provides the average international non-citizen award and percent of international citizens receiving aid. So it's quite a comprehensive data set that I can't imagine how much time it takes them to put together. But one of the things that I've done, if you go to the next slide, is I downloaded it and go ahead and hit play. And what I'm going to do here, and using the pay version of ChatGPT, I upload the financial aid for undergraduate international students slide deck. I'm sorry, a spreadsheet. And all I did is upload it and hit enter. So right now it's just taking some time to process what the data that I just uploaded is. And it takes a minute. So here's all of the different information that's contained within the spreadsheet. And it doesn't have all institutions. If I remember correctly, it has somewhere around 700, I believe, in their slide deck. So then what I did is I took some of the schools from the previous, if you pause it right there real quick, Ben. So what I said is, please evaluate the likelihood of earning aid at the following list of schools. And these 3 schools of the last search that I had done were the 3 institutions that are included in this data set. I said I'm a 3.1 and a 1200 SAT. I want to study political science. My family can afford 30 grand. And I need you to analyze the data from my list of schools and provide a likelihood of admissibility and a likelihood of receiving aid. Use only the data set provided. So you saw me type that in at the end. Been kind of through some iterative process trying to tweak that prompt to get it right to give me the types of answers that I wanted. So if you go ahead and roll the clip, thanks, Ben. It's analyzing, it thinks, it's trying to process these two different requests. One just about the likelihood of admissibility, and the second about the likelihood of receiving aid. And so it cranks out a little bit of the data that was included from Jenny and Jeff's data set. And now it's going to say, so the analysis for Clark provides need and merit, the likelihood of admission with the higher GPAs and SATs. This is a possible to a reach admission, which aligns with what we saw earlier. Likelihood of aid with international, you have a good chance of securing some aid, but the average award leaves a gap relative to what you need based on what I said. Gordon, a very similar thing, less selective, so more of a likely, but the financial situation is going to be a little bit more dire. Will you pause real quick, Ben? And then finally, there's no data on aid percentage or amounts, so it's a little bit uncertain, but it's probably more of a possible school at St. Michael's. So again, a way to use some data, another data set to inform the output that ChatGPT is providing to you. I find this to be really interesting. There's a million questions, a million different ways in which I personally would want to move forward from here, thinking about different ways to maybe apply some of those acronyms shared earlier on to evolve the questioning, to evolve the prompting, to maybe perhaps come up with some more accurate, more interesting outputs to, again, assist students with that list building process, to assist them with that understanding of the ways in which their financial situation might impact their college process. So with that, I think that was my last slide, Ben.
Yep.
I think with that, I'm going to hand back over to Ben to take us home.
Thanks, Jeff. So for my example, I wanted to highlight a tool that wasn't one of the frontier models. So again, this is where I think in the past month or two, I've been spending a lot more of my time is actually not as much using tools like ChatGPT or Gemini, but instead using these other platforms. And one that I have found particularly helpful for some very specific reasons is called Notebook LM. And this is a tool created by Google. I mentioned it earlier in my list of tools. It's one that's really, really good at sticking to the facts you give it, to the sources you give it. So I want to show you two quick examples. The first is I often find myself needing to keep on top of new research papers about whether it's something related to college admission, or we do a lot of work with sort of academic support and assessment in the earlier grades of K through 12. And I'm very busy. I don't have time to read everything. And I've found this tool to be really awesome as a companion for that. The other example I want to give is a little bit more of a fun example, but it also has a tool that you might have heard about where you can produce a custom kind of scarily good sounding podcast based on any sort of information you give it. And I know a number of friends who use this when they're driving or jogging to catch up on information in a format which is very comfortable to listen to. So I'm actually going to switch my screen share here to, I think this is the right tab. I have too many tab open syndrome. Here we go. So I mentioned analyzing a paper. So here is an example. This is a new commentary that just came out in Educational Measurement Issues in Practice around the changing landscape of test optional policies from Wayne Camera, who's a sort of lead researcher with the Law School Admissions Council. Very dense here, as you can see, lots of charts and graphs and data and words and sources. And so I could read the whole thing, and I probably will eventually read the whole thing. But in the short term, I can navigate to Notebook LM, which is just notebooklm.google, and it takes you to google.com. And the way Notebook LM works is I've already fed it the source, but it kind of flows from left to right. So you can see it's got the sources, and this is where you would add one or more sources. If I click add source, you can see it's very flexible. You can upload a file, you can link it to something that's in your Google Drive, a website URL, YouTube. You can just paste in text. It really is very flexible at handling lots of stuff. It does not handle videos directly. That's the one thing. You'd have to have it on YouTube in order to consume it. This is part of where Google's ecosystem comes into play. But in this case, I paid for the PDF. My company did, at least, and I'm able to upload it. This middle chat is where it now takes only about 30 seconds. It reads it, it digests it, and this is where you could do things like ask it questions. And it gives you some suggested questions over here, but we could ask it whatever we wanted. I actually have not tried this yet on here, but we can click one of these. And this is, in effect, kind of like having a prompting or a chat dialogue like you would with ChatGPT. The only difference here is you're basically only talking to whatever sources you gave it. Whereas when you talk to ChatGPT, to some extent, no matter how much you give it data or instructions, it likes to sometimes go back to its training set. And so this is nice because it's very good at just giving the facts from the article, and you'll see these citations. It actually will, if you hover over these, it will show you the exact text from that part of the article, as well as what sources were used in doing it. So you can chat with it here, which is kind of nice. It's very verbose, as you can see. And then over here on the right is where you can play with what they call their studio. And this is where you can create new content based on whatever your sources are. So for example, in this case, I might want a briefing document. I might want a review quiz. So if I click on this briefed document, then it basically gives me an executive summary of the document, key findings in the document. There's some issues with the numbering here, as you can see. It's not perfect. Everything's a 1. I don't find the briefing document super helpful, only because they're very verbose. It's not that much shorter. What I think is actually maybe more helpful are some of the FAQs. And so it's pretty good at guessing what some of the right questions are to ask and answering them. So I read 4 or 5 of these and I get a sense for what's happening in the article. In the case where you might be pursuing more education yourself, a graduate degree or a certification program, it also has a really cool review feature where it can basically generate a quiz for you. And again, in this case, it's 1 PDF, but you could feed this 10 PDFs. I think probably 100 PDFs, and there's enough room in its context window. And it will generate a bespoke quiz for you with an answer key, which is pretty cool. This is a tool that I've already introduced to my oldest child, who is a senior in high school, as he gets ready to go off to college, and sort of trying to build his capacity for creative ways to generate a study process for different content. And then finally, last example on Notebook LM. In this case, the example here, we know that right now we are in the midst, as am I as a parent, of students receiving some of their early round decisions right now. And that will obviously continue. The decision outflow will continue for the next few months. So just as an example, I grabbed 3 articles, 2 by my friend Brennan Barnard, and 1 by Rick Clark, who I've also collaborated with. I tend to like the way they write with a parent voice. So I grabbed those 3 articles, just linked them. I think if I click on this, it'll go to a version of the source from the web. It's on Forbes, right? Paste those in there, and then the exact same thing you can do here. But over here, what I did is I clicked the button which said generate a podcast. So I won't play the whole thing for you, but let's listen to maybe a minute of this.
Okay, everyone, deep breaths. If you're listening to this right now, chances are you and your senior are staring at those early decision emails from colleges. Heart's probably pounding a bit.
Yeah, I can imagine. It is a roller coaster for the whole family.
No kidding. So we've gathered some wisdom from the trenches for this deep dive. School counselors, authors who've been there, even college admission
You're
directors.
trying to make sense of this whole intense process.
Exactly. And the biggest takeaway up front.
It's going to be okay, truly. This one decision, this whole college application thing, it doesn't define your kid or their future.
Reassuring. Because right now it feels huge EE. Like Brennan Barnard, he's a school counselor and a parent going through it this year. He said it's way more intense than he ever pictured.
Oh, wow. Even with all his experience.
Even after years of youth sports stress.
All right, so you get the general idea. In this case, it made about a 13-minute long podcast. It tends to track with how much content you give it. One of these articles was particularly long and it cited a lot of other sources, so it will give you more. And I see Brennan is here in the audience. I did not know that Brennan was going to be here. So I will note, I was about to note, one of the dangers in an exercise like this is one of the articles I linked that you wrote, Brennan, is from 3 years ago. And so it speaks to, Brennan, who is a parent of a senior right now. Like, that obviously is no longer the case. You have to be really careful with the timeliness of your sources. I would say, even though I said earlier hallucinations don't happen very often with Notebook LM, you do always want to check. So Brennan might know best. I saw a question, how do you identify the speakers? This tool really only does this way. It'll give you a 1-speaker version or a 2-speaker version. If you do 2, it is always the same male and female sounding voices. You have no control over that whatsoever. And so, again, I want to be mindful that this is not necessarily going to be the right application for a lot of stuff, but I can think of some pretty interesting cases where maybe you have a few really, really good things. You have a parent audience or a student audience that is not going to read those 2,000 or 3,000 words. You throw it into this, it makes a fun little podcast. You link it on your office's homepage. Again, where I have used it personally is feeding it multiple research articles on a topic and asking it to podcast me a summary while I go for a walk or something and then listen to it. I'm not then taking what is in there as the gospel truth that I need to go and do that, but it'll often spark, okay, this is what I need to do to dive deeper for my personal use, is to go look at this part of it or go dig deeper. And I just will say that what they really have nailed, if I jump to some random part.
Completely hands off.
Right. It's that sweet spot. Guidance versus autonomy. Like, you've taught your kid to ride a bike, gave them the skills, now they got to practice on their own. You're still there cheering them on, but you're not pedaling for them.
So what they have really nailed, I feel like, is the very natural podcast style. It's very conversational. And I've played clips of something like this for a coworker without telling her that it was using this tool, and she was like, "Whoa, someone made a podcast about our internal business documents. Who did that?" Right? So it's pretty neat. And I'm seeing a question here about language. At the moment, there is no built-in language tool here, but there are plenty of tools where you could download this as an MP3 and throw it into a translate tool. 11 Labs will do that, so will DeepL, and then it would translate. And I definitely will give a shout out to Brennan's point in the answers that in Brennan's case, if you want to hear what he has to say, he and is often, on the same episodes, Rick Clark, have a fantastic podcast and a book that I own. So this is not intended to replace our wise humans that are providing that content, but it can be a neat way to do that. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to more Q&A. I think the last slide I have on here just says Q&A, but you can see one more Imagen 3 generated image, which was curious college counselor asking questions about AI models in watercolor style. So, and again, you have to be very careful with all image models not to try to read whatever text they put up on it got college right. Everything else is gibberish. So I'm going to stop share now, and I think there are some good questions in the chat. Actually, I see one, if it's okay, Jeff, that I'll jump right into from Catherine.
Go for it.
Tips on how to stay on top of all these tools as it's all moving so quickly. I actually thought I had made a slide on this, and it must not have, in my furious drafting process, it must have fallen off. But this is something I do have some thoughts on. I'll type them into the answer in a minute, but I have a daily newsletter I like, a weekly podcast I like, and a monthly deep dive newsletter that I like. And there are a lot of them out there, but for me, that kind of scratches the daily itch of it comes out at 6 a.m. It's bite-sized. I can skim it. Most days it's whatever, but then some days it's Google released Imagen 3 and everyone's saying it's the best. Okay, that might be something I'm going to go try today if I need to generate some images for a presentation that I am delivering. So I think it is a really valid question, though. Things move so fast that you have to balance staying on top of it, but also not being overwhelmed with the noise, right? You got to find the signal, and that can be the really hard part. So hopefully, the ones I'll give you, I tend to think as being high signal information sources, and are pretty good at not including noise, but not that they're perfect. So, Jeff, I don't know if you want to grab a question off the list, and I'll type to Catherine on that.
Sure, and thanks for the shout out, Brennan. I also maintain a newsletter for this audience. I'll put it into the chat when I'm done here. Question. So, Kate, custom GPT, you like to do everything in temporary. I don't think I can use my custom GPTs in that case unless I copy and paste. This is a great question. I actually don't know, Kate. I seldom actually use the custom GPT feature, the custom instructions feature myself. Usually I'm kind of leaving it open. And it does relate to a question that somebody else says, does this remember the history? Is every conversation a fresh start? I have 100 more students. I'm wondering if I need to do this for every student. There is a way, and particularly when it comes to student privacy, FERPA, ADA, IDA, all of that, it is kind of best practice not to share specific student information with the hive mind, and you can turn off the sharing your data. And I think the best practice right now is probably, even if you turn that off, to redact student names, identifying information from anything that you might put into ChatGPT. But in regards to the example that I gave, yeah, you would have to, I think, customize that prompt for each individual student. But one sort of use case that you might consider is to think about giving, empowering students to do this, to give that particular prompt that I used directly to the students to see, they can fill it in at their own, on their own, and kind of iterate as they see fit. But I think to come back to your question, Kate, I don't know if that is indeed accurate, or how to go about with the save GPTs. My understanding is that once I put in the custom instructions, each new window, each new search, each new sort of process that I initiate will be governed by those custom instructions. There's a little toggle switch at the bottom to allow it to turn it on and to turn it off, essentially. So I think, even though you like to do everything in temporary, and by temporary, I imagine you mean you don't share your data with the hive mind, I'm quite certain that the custom instructions would remain applicable. What it wouldn't do is remember previous searches, which is, I think, in line with what that other question is about. If you turn that off, it won't remember things. A couple of weeks ago in my newsletter, I had come across this particular prompt about, asking ChatGPT to draw a picture of you if based upon what it knows about you, which is a pretty interesting question to ask. But it does remember some things when you have that turned on, and it tends to prioritize more recent searches and more recent applications. Ben, I'll hand it back over to you if there's any.
Yeah, I've just been answering a bunch. And by the way, I did, in the response to the question, Catherine's question, I think it was, about sort of staying up to date, I included a bunch of links there, including the link to Jeff's weekly college admissions AI focused newsletter, Tech-Neill-ogy, which, as Brendan noted, is the best. And then let's see, other one I saw here. I'm not sure if the rest might be more for you, Jeff. And I'm gonna go ahead and just amplify Kate's point about Wonder Tools. That is a really good one. I'll just type answer live so that it shows up as well. But I don't know if you have any final thoughts. I've got a hard stop, but if you want to hit one more, we could probably do that.
Sure. So I'll go with Cassandra. Hi, Cassandra. This has been very eye-opening. Thank you. I'm curious how you work with students when introducing these tools in the college and career process. What does it look like, whole group versus individual? It kind of depends upon what we're doing. It's a great question. In some sort of applications, we are, and the example that I often give is we got really fixated on the idea of an elevator pitch for our students to sort of focus their intentions in a university application. And we did that in a group session. But then with some of the other sort of, list building, trying to sort of elaborate, explore scholarships or financially supportive institutions, we would do more on an individual basis. But by and large, what we're trying to do more often than not is to show students proper use and to empower them to use these tools. And the way that I always frame it is as a thought partner rather than as a tool in and of itself. It's one of those sort of, I think, tricks that we've found that helps students see the difference between artificial intelligence, ChatGPT and Google. So, yeah, so I think we're pretty much at time here, Ben, and you got to
Yeah.
get going. So,
I have another webinar, unfortunately. I would rather do this for the next 15 minutes if I could. So.
well, thank you all so very much. Really appreciate you all being here, and thanks for your support of the NACAC Special Interest Group and Artificial Intelligence in College Admissions. And please be in touch with either Ben or me if you have any follow-up questions, anything we can do to support you in your work. Again, have a great rest of your day or evening.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jeff.
Take care, Ben.